Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Budget Presentation 1 of 2018. Thank you all for coming. Could you, if you have questions at the end of the presentation, come down to the mics? As you know, this is being televised to other sites across the province, so please come down to the microphone so we can record those comments. And as you know, typical routine that you being here is your consent to be as part of the video and your comments recorded, so as long as you know that in detail. This is essentially what we're going to be covering this morning, split between the three of us. And again, we welcome your questions once the presentation is over. Okay. So without further ado, let's begin.
Sure. I didn't see that you had the clicker, so I think I'd time to click a slide. Good, well, welcome. Thank you very much. First of all, a little bit about the process and things like that, budget submissions. Even though we've started this, it shows in January. Actually, is that the next slide starts off with some dates in January. It's actually a full year-long process in terms of continually doing it, the ops forecast and all the other different things. As Dave mentions, all those things, there's a huge website, lots of information and things like that. It's sort of all spelled out on there, but we'll actually walk through some of the key things. So we sent out the budget call back in, when was it, October, November, whatever. Click on, go to the budget website and things like that. You'll see that actual letter. Talks about a number of the different challenges, and of course, like every year, there's always lots. Insufficient government funding, net 7% last year in terms of a reduction. What's going to happen this year, we don't know, but that was just the operating budget side. We've been really behind the power curve and way less than any, and actually the government term in one study was lowest levels of prudence. We're below the lowest levels of prudence for allocations in capital for more than a decade now. So a challenge there. Of course, every year our expenses go up. Salaries and benefits have to increase. So we have to find money for that. Tuition, we've been increasing it all the time. Unfortunately, enrollments have been going up, so that helps. But as I think Tom will probably speak to a little bit later, we're one of the highest in Western Canada. Can we continue to take an increased tuition? So that's a question and a challenge. Places where we need to take and we know we need to take and make more investments, and if we could, we would. And so supporting grad students, for instance, supporting units and places in general that have grown, but in particular where we've benefited from huge enrollment increases, then of course spending commensurate with that to actually take and help out those units with that additional work. Similarly, with respect to student services, both expectations legislation-wise across the units and things, there's lots of work that changes in legislation require additional work. Students' expectations and things with increasing tuition and things like that anticipate or expect additional services, etc. And of course, research, ever growing. Dave will talk to some good news on the research side and things, but as we grow that, of course, there's additional support required for all of it. All of these things putting demands on the system. Now, things like the next three, and I can throw in another one in there in terms of things like carbon tax. If the carbon tax comes through, that's going to be more than $300,000 in the first year, growing to 1.2 million extra money that we just have to find somewhere. But PST is already on us. That's $500,000 a year in this budget that we didn't account for, had no way of knowing to account for it in past years. So right off the bottom line. Canada pension plan changes are coming. There's another $250,000 and growing to take and pay for those if the carbon tax comes. So legislative changes that just take and non-discretionary need to take and make changes. Library acquisitions is one that we've talked about for a number of years, particularly with respect to currency changes and inflation and even the way that electronic acquisitions and things like that are going. So challenges across which wouldn't, none of these I think are any surprise to anyone. These and other things are what make it tough to take and balance the budget. So we've asked the budget managers, the dean, directors, AVPs, and others to go ahead and tell us a little bit about, are there places where you can take and make further economies in your own organization without significantly impacting service or the bottom line? Similarly, are there places where you can take and identify, or we as an institution or you as a department can take and somehow increase our revenue? So you can either decrease expenses or increase revenues to make things balance. And of course, take and identify things that are really necessary to either support our core teaching, research, community service, or student missions and things. What are some of those high priority areas and needs? In it, we also said we're not looking to do an across the board percentage reduction across it. We didn't specifically ask for individual scenarios, like we didn't say describe a 3% cut, a 5% cut, etc. We left it to those broader things that had as the 3 bullets on the previous slide. President Timmins has been going around all the faculty councils and has, of course, spoken at a number of other areas. Executive of Council on a number of occasions has reiterated that there's an importance and an intent, if at all possible, to take and grow the tenure track faculty as a bit of a priority, and it specifically identified resources permitting, the target of 5 perhaps in each of the next 2 years. That adds to the challenges. And just a note that, of course, every time tenure track positions and things like that are commitments well into the future, and typically $100,000 to $125,000 for each. So those were generally a bit of the challenges. In terms of the process and the definition and things, we haven't changed it at all. Back, we published Council Committee on Budget, published the priorities from their perspective. The board has published, and I think that they're identical, published it as the official university position. They're again on the budget website and things, but they're generally aligned with the strategic plan, taking and targeting recruitment and retention in key programs, and looking at the appropriateness of structures and staffing. And of course, taking and emphasize places where we're taking and growing and retention. Of course, Indigenous positions, that's one of the threads through the campus plan, and high on the priority to try and satisfy through this budget process. Number of the different key dates, as I mentioned before, it's actually a year-long process. We're already starting. We've submitted the operations forecast for next year already, basically 18 months in advance. But in terms of developing this specific budget, of course, started off last Friday. The Dean's Council got together to take and look and have some serious discussions about the submissions for this year. Right now we're at the Budget Forum number 1, Council Committee on Budget, and glad to see the chair of Council Committee on Budget here, and others that start some of the hard work. I got a meeting, I think, Monday afternoon. Is that the next meeting? And a series of them over the next couple months where they take and review them. Mid-February, we've got we'll do a budget update for the Board of Governors. We won't know until we think the 28th of March is the provincial budget may come down, so we won't know exactly what we're getting from the province till then. We'll have another budget forum soon after. The budget advisors to UET, along with the Council Committee on Budget, will all be meeting during those time periods, providing input to the President, and then ultimately the President makes a recommendation to the Board of Governors. The 3rd and 4th of May, committee on the 3rd and full board on the 4th, and then we hope early in May to get the budget letters out, and then have a budget forum that describes that right after.
Good to go. Hi everybody, can you hear me in the back? Am I clear? let me just walk you through some numbers. And as a background of these numbers, 20 years ago, tuition and fees paid by students, undergrad and grad, made up 25% of the budget. This year it's about 38 or 39% of the operating budget, and we anticipate within another year or two it will be over 40% of our operating expenditures are covered by tuition and fees, because the government grant has not, in the past 6 years, kept pace with the inflationary costs that we face. And as David said last year, effectively we got a 7% cut in public funding. So obviously understanding something about where we're going with enrollments and tuition is important for an understanding of the budget. So we had budgeted last year, in this fiscal year, an increase of 1% in overall campus enrollments. It's complex because undergraduate enrollments differ from graduate enrollments, domestic enrollments differ from international enrollments and tuition structures, but basically a 1% overall increase. We did better than that, despite the fact that our local market remains in decline. There are fewer and fewer high school graduating students until about 2022, when that will pick up again, and all those kids who are currently filling the elementary schools to capacity and beyond will be coming out here starting in 2022. But despite that, we're up. Undergraduate enrollment increased in the fall, and credit hours are up 3.2%. So again, as we do every year, thank you to those in the room, and there are many of you here present who have contributed to that growth by attracting students, by advising students, by helping to retain those students in our programs. And that's meant a very positive variance there. Graduate enrollments went up just short of 1%. And for the current term, right now, we're not at the final stats for the current term, but we're up 3% as of the first day of classes year over year for winter. So the enrollment numbers right now are all pretty healthy and pretty encouraging. The difficulty with enrollments is that they can move quickly in the other direction. If something were to happen south of the border, given what's going on in the United States in a period of instability in global relations, and we were suddenly, for whatever reason, to lose 100 or 200 visa students, the parents pulled them back to the home country or whatever it was, we would quickly face a major financial challenge. So the key to understanding this is that enrollments are fragile, and the farther away those enrollments come to us, the more fragile they get, the more subject they are to vagaries of the world economy and world events. But despite that, Olivia, her team, working with the faculties, working with student affairs, working with, again, many people across campus, have brought overall visa students up by 5% year over year. So our visa student, international student enrollments continue to climb. They're up 3% at the undergraduate level and 10% at the graduate level, contributing further to the transformation of campus and contributing, quite frankly, to our bottom line on the revenue side. Visa students are now 14.2% of our total headcount enrollment on this campus. That's much lower than some schools, say in the East. St. Mary's in Halifax is very close to 30%. We're in line roughly with our Western competitor universities within a percentage range or two. And as you know, those visa enrollments tend to be concentrated or clustered in some areas, in some disciplines, particularly areas like engineering and computer science and math. Undergraduate visa students, I think everybody in the room knows, pay 3 times the domestic tuition rate, reflecting the fact that domestic students tend to come from families who over the years have contributed a fair amount of tax revenue, where new inbound visa students have not. That's the ostensible reason behind that, but it's a very big contributor. And right now, our undergraduate tuition revenue from international students is very close to $25 million out of the 80-odd million in tuition and fee revenue in total. So that's just a bit of an overview of where we are right now with enrollments and the effect that those enrollments have on our revenue side. And a reminder too that enrollments are fragile, and we need to work to compete in an increasingly competitive environment for these students, and we need to work hard to retain students who can be retained. There's a lot of numbers here, but we tried to keep it as streamlined as possible in comparison with previous years where we've put even more numbers up there. So let me just walk you through this. We had 25 budget submissions, and these have now gone out to the budget advisors and the university leadership team, CCB, under the chairmanship of Dr. Chulé, is going to start work on these very soon. In those 25 submissions, budget managers responding to needs in their units, and there are legitimate needs all over this campus, whether it's HR, financial services, or facilities, or external relations, or all of the faculties from arts alphabetically down to social work. There are legitimate needs because we've seen a lot of growth on this campus in the past 7 or 8 years. So we have requests for about 35 new positions across campus as part of that budget submission exercise. If we say that an average new position, this is net new, and it includes all ranges, QP, APT, and faculty, average out at $90,000 a year, including benefits. There is the rough total of the requests just for the new positions, $3.15 million. And these numbers are approximate. And below, I want to stress what follows below is a small sample of the non-position requests. There are literally dozens of non-position requests from the units. And again, these are valid requests for things like supporting software licensing costs, for supporting student mental health, for supporting payroll functions, for supporting campus maintenance, for supporting teaching, for supporting the research enterprise, for supporting just endless activities and endless needs across campus. But that series of examples is a small subset. These are not the only requests, nor are these high priority requests. It's just to give you a flavor of some of the requests that people have been making. So our costs for licensing our software across campus, and that includes not just the enterprise software like Banner and Elucidant and so on, but academic software like ArcGIS, Turnitin, Qualtrics, and so on, software that many people in the room use not just for administrative functions, but for teaching and research functions, we estimate to be about $1.7 million. And since much of that is priced in US dollars, if the exchange rate is favorable, that number goes down in Canadian. If the exchange rate becomes unfavorable, the number goes up in Canadian dollars. We need a records management system. It's part of legal requirements that publicly funded institutions maintain records in a certain way. We need a records management system that's estimated to cost up to $900,000. We need marketing and community engagement support to continue to attract students to this campus, and the estimate there is $480K. If we want to continue to grow our graduate enterprise, we need to be competitive with other universities. We are not. I'll be perfectly frank, if you've seen the news in the last week and a half, the University of Toronto effectively offers free tuition for the first 3 or 4 years for its graduate students. It's now indicated that in the 5th year, Dave, is it the 5th year, they're going to reduce international graduate tuition to domestic rates. Toronto, though, has a several billion-dollar endowment, the proceeds from which help them afford things like that. We simply don't have that kind of financial capacity. But we do have a request for additional graduate scholarships of $385K to bolster our graduate enrollments, to bolster our graduate retention, to graduate these students, and to contribute to the university's research enterprise. Website renewal. Everyone loves the university's website. The estimate of redoing the entire thing, stem to stern, is about $300K a year for the next 3 years. And so in budget deliberations, one of the questions will be, do we start setting that money aside beginning next year and get that project rolling? Varsity athletics are becoming increasingly expensive. Moving teams around to compete. Transportation costs are going up. Insurance costs are going up, and so on. So there's a request for $300K for that. And CFI contingency from the research side, to put a bit of contingency funding in there, a request for $300K. Our rough estimate, and this is loose again, is about $5 million in additional non-position requests, every one of them with validity and every one of them reflecting an area of need on campus. So here are the basic parameters. Because of that unexpected growth in tuition, in enrollment rather, we're up 1.6 million. So we're going into the next fiscal up 1.6 million on tuition and fee revenue, ahead of where we thought we would be. If we had another 1% growth in enrollments this coming fiscal year, that would earn us about another $750K on current tuition rates. So if we can get another percent in and retain students in numbers similar to the numbers we're retaining them in now, it'd be about $750K. If tuition went up 2% on the undergraduate side, on those enrollment levels, it would earn us about another $1.5 million. You see the graduate number there. Utility savings. Nelson and his crew, his colleagues in facilities management, have been working very hard to reduce the amount we spend on utilities. There'll be more about that from Dave in a few moments. But we're able to save about $435,000 over budget because of really good energy saving initiatives across campus. So on the 28th, we'll all be holding our breath if that is indeed budget day. The reason for the potential delay this year is the uncertainty in the political scene and a leadership race going on. But if on the 28th we get our budget letter and it says your grant is X, that's the rough math. Every percentage plus or minus on our grant is roughly $1 million. The grant right now is $104 million operating. So if we get a -2, we're down roughly $2 million. If we get a +2, we're up roughly $2 million. We estimate that on current contracts, and we are in negotiations, and we will not discuss negotiations away from the table, but we're in negotiations, on current contract levels for the current complement of faculty and staff, for things like CGIs, merits, progressions through the ranks, and so on, we estimate that we need another $3.3 million in salary and benefit increases just to cover our existing complement. And if we were to spend $1 million on reinvestment, if we were to take that list from the previous slide and spend $1 million out of the roughly $5 million being requested, you can do the math then very quickly on how much more tuition revenue we would need, how much more government grant we would need, or what the implications would be if the government grant is not what we would like it to be. So that's just a rough overview of the major parameters. I'll leave it to Dave now for research.
Thanks. I wanted to give you a bit of an overview of some of the major initiatives that we've got going currently. As you may or may not know, we've just received the biggest single university research grant. Dr. Nick Carlton received $8.8 million from the RCMP to study post-traumatic stress disorder with the cadets at RCMP. So this is a very large contract. It's over 3 years, and then we have the option to renew year by year after that, which we certainly assume will happen. Connected to this, or all part of this, is the Canadian Institute for Public Safety Research and Treatment. This institute exists here on campus now. It's sort of a sister organization to what's known as CIMVER, the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health. But we're focused here on first responders and on mental health and PTSD. We have a major request into the federal government, and hopefully we are going to receive some good news in the spring budget. We do have a very significant announcement coming in on Thursday. I won't give that away because it's embargoed, but keep your eyes open for an announcement on Thursday for really interesting funding coming in for CIPCERT. CIPCERT is under the umbrella of the Collaborative Center for Justice and Safety. The next initiative, BRIC, you may have heard about this. I think 2 or 3 years ago, received $2.3 million from Western Economic Diversification to fund this. Essentially what the BRIC is or what it was then, it was a test bed in Regina, the only one in Canada, to see how we can better communicate between first responders to crisis, to disaster situations. The experiment, the test bed here in Regina, was so successful that we have put in a proposal to the federal government for 13 sites across the country to expand this whole network. It is a hefty $140 million. We don't receive $140 million at U of R, we receive a piece of it, but it's just an indication of our efforts to get involved in major projects and to get in the big leagues and ask for major funding from provincial and industry sources. Third, this is another big one. maybe a long shot. There were 50 proposals put in earlier in the year to the federal government for major industry-led initiatives. It was reduced down to 9, and I have here February, but I think it's not going to be till March that they make the announcement. So we're among 9 across the country to hopefully receive some substantial funding. We're partners in this with a variety of other, we're with the U of S, of course, and there's a variety of industry partners involved as well. But fingers crossed, this could be a major success story for us, and we'll find out about that in March. Another bit of good news, again, we're waiting for this. We received approval from Ottawa, from StatsCan, for us to have our own regional data center in RDC. There is currently one at the U of S, but in order for our researchers to access this, they've got to travel to U of S. And it's a logistical, I won't say it's a nightmare, but it's a logistical hassle. So what we've done is we've partnered with the Ministry of Justice and as well as ISM, and hopefully we're going to have this regional data center up and running, fingers crossed, in the fall. Funding has been earmarked from the Ministry of Justice, but we don't have it in our hot hand as yet. Next, hopefully this week, we'll be announcing a search for the Associate Vice President Research and Dean of Graduate Studies. This is a combined position. As you know, the advertisement went out for the Associate Vice President Academic. That's in process right now. This is the role that Dina occupied was the combined academic and research. And what we're doing is we're splitting those off to provide more resource and more, essentially more resource for both the academic and the research enterprise. So keep your eyes peeled for that. It's in, where's Kelly? It's in HR right now, I think. So hopefully by the end of the week, and with the view to have this position filled for July 1, 2018. And the intent, of course, is, you see the research initiatives, the big game that we're going into. We're hoping that this position will allow us more strategic capacity, more ability to play in the big leagues. Cohort program. 43 participants this year. I believe it was very, very successful. In the past, it's just been social science and humanities faculty. This year, it was opened up to social science, humanities, and CERC, as well as CIHR. We'll see the results, I guess, in the spring, how well the participants did. But from all accounts, it was a very successful program. We tweaked it a bit from what we've done in the past. So I'll be happy to report in the spring exactly what kind of progress we made with the cohort program. In general, relative to this time last year, SHRC applications are up. NSERC applications, I believe, are way up. And CIHR, CIHR is in a goofy place right now because they're changing their application deadlines, they're changing their policies and their procedures, so it's really difficult for us to have accurate comparisons with what we've done in the past. I can tell you, but I can't tell you the names. We just heard yesterday we received 937 million, sorry.
Problem solved.
And I'm going home. Yes, that's right, wake up, pinch myself. 937,000 from CIHR. So 2 of our researchers were successful. There were 6 applications in this competition that we put in, and 2 were successful. And about evenly split, 400,000 and change for each one. Geez, I wish. So that was great news. All the granting councils are very competitive, very difficult to get awards, and CHR is perhaps among the toughest in terms of success rates. So we've done well there. And I think that's it. Happy to answer questions when we're finished.
Thank you.
Good.
And continuing with the good news, we let Tom do all the bad news stuff.
Yeah.
That's the way it is in the office as well. The capital program and things, huge. We pulled this slide actually out of presentations in a minute. I'm going to talk to you, you might have heard the fact that we did a bond and things like that. Part of the bond, you have to really paint your financial picture and show what you're doing in every aspect of the university, but capital projects is one thing that they were interested in. So College Avenue campus, getting near the end. Of course, this is economic development stimulus money that came from the federal government, matched basically 50-50. It's got a requirement to be finished by the end of April. We're going to meet that target. There's about another $5 million worth of post work that we'll also do beyond that, but we'll be one of the universities that actually finishes right on time. And as a result of that, we've actually got a small increment increase that isn't included in that, another $126,000 or so that is then matched. So another $250,000 as a result of being ahead of schedule. And for people who have been through that, it apparently looks absolutely incredible. So it'll be great for Johnson Chamber and the Center for Continuing Education people to move back into. And in fact, for every one of these, I should say right now, it's always short-term pain for long-term gain. And so particularly people in CCE who have been kicked out into temporary accommodation and things like that, thanks for your patience. For people in the lab building and things like that, having to work through it, College West, etc. Of course, thanks. Everyone contributes to the success of it. The College West residents, again, got to be finished and things, and it will be for the Congress to come in May, and it looks absolutely fantastic. How many people have been through it, by the way? Looks like 10 or 12. I'm hearing nothing but absolutely fantastic feedback that the students are going to be fighting to get into that one. Lab building, of course, a little bit of unseen, doesn't have that glitzy ribbon cutting type thing, but some really important upgrades to be able to do and hook up key bits of equipment, both power, exhaust fumes, and of course operate them all in a safe and efficient way. And I'll come back to some of the efficiency things in a minute. Dark Hall, we've done $3 million worth of work, basically what we're just calling the envelope. So basically protecting windows, roof, and things. And we've got another initiative. It's not part of our capital yet, but you would have known, we've talked about it before, partnering with Connexus, which is us levering the value of the land that the city will give to us. We still haven't got it from the city, by the way, the part to the east or to the west of the current Dark Hall. That will be another $60 million project for them. It'll lever some money that then takes and pays for some of the matching money for the first project, part of the SIFT program. So there'll be more work done in there, and we'll do some more work. The fundraising people are working hard at getting our money. 100% of that $3 million came from donors, and a major chunk of the others will come from donors as well. And we're applying for another federal program, Canadian Cultural Spaces Fund, to see if we can get some money from them as well. Of course, it's already finished, but had an opportunity to take and partner with Campion to build the tunnel, an extension to their project while we were building Kissick. And a really important one from impacts to the operating budget is getting $1.7 million from SAS Power to do a bunch of upgrades throughout the campus, but a key one, of course, is in the lab building. And that's $108 million there, but as mentioned, there's some other projects that's levered as well. Speaking of energy and things, Tom spoke about the savings that we're able to take and a dividend back to the operating budget because of some of these capital projects. This is just one picture of the lab building over the past 6 months and things. And so you can see 3 years worth of data where it tracks pretty consistent. And then all of a sudden, bang, down by about 40%. And it's those sorts of things. This is just the lab building, but throughout campus we're getting this kind of thing. And that's why we've got a $435,000 dividend this year, despite the fact that rates are going up. What's electrical rates going up this year? 5% twice, I think. So 10% in the year. And despite that, we're forecasting we can turn back $435,000, which is pretty incredible. At the next forum, we'll hopefully commit to painting a bigger picture to show that over the years it's been millions and millions of the base operating budget that we've been able to save through some of these initiatives. So that's just one picture. I mentioned about the bond and things. Another place that we'll be doing some savings. Some very innovative work by our financial services people, and a bit of a change in the financial markets to enable us to do things like bonds. We've always done our debt financing and things by traditional mortgages or interest rate swaps and things. But we went out to the market through about 7 different tendering processes to get first of all advisors, but then actual money managers that would KPMG for the first one, Bank of Montreal for the money manager, bond rating agencies, etc., to actually come up with huge success. So we've got a 40-year bond for $79 million. It enables us to consolidate our debt into one package and at a rate of 3.3% for that 40 years. So that's way lower than what we had built into the business cases and things, so each one of these projects just got that much easier. And what it does as well is it recognizes the state of the university from the perspective of an investor. And other than a time a couple years ago, University of Ottawa got a rate of 3.25%. Other than that, the lowest in the university sector ever. Just the week before, Western University, you'd think that they'd be able to get a better rate than us, but we actually beat their rate. Another project that we've talked about, other ones, so I'll just give you a little bit of an update. And it's going slowly because obviously it's a big issue, but the working with government and the Crown Investments Corporations to take control of the research parks back into the 2 universities. So U of S is doing it for their part of SoCo and the Innovation Place up in Saskatoon. We're doing it at ours. We've had appraisals done. They've had an appraisal done. We've had an appraisal done. We've shared those appraisals. U of S hasn't had that done yet, so we're waiting for that to happen, and then we'll consider, if it's a good business case for us and things like that, taking over ownership and control of our own research park. And part of our argument is that the development has been stymied for the past number of years. There just hasn't been as much development as forecast, which I think has hindered some of our research program and capability. And so with it under our own authority, perhaps we'll do more. Otherwise, I'll pass it back to Tom.
Thanks, Dave, and we're almost at the end here. Last year, the university hosted the Canada-wide Science Fair, the National Science Fair, and brought 700 or 800 people to campus. Many people, again, in this room from the Faculty of Science, Engineering, and other parts of campus were involved. That was a relatively big event, and it was so successful here that my understanding is we've been invited to bid again for the Canada-wide Science Fair for another 3 times over the next decade. They were so impressed by the support that the Canada-wide Science Fair received from this campus, and so impressed with the campus itself. This May, we're hosting a biggie. The biggest academic conference in the country will be here. The biggest conference ever in Regina, not the biggest event, but the biggest conference ever in Regina, and that is Congress 2018. Just a reminder that when we bid for this back in 2012, we were up against a series of schools, and it came down to a war, if you like, between UBC Vancouver and the University of Regina. And the University of Regina won, in large part because the committee was convinced that the support of the community was behind the university. The city, the province, the restaurants, the hotels, and everybody in the city was behind this bid. So we are expecting about 7,000 attendees on campus at the end of May and beginning of June. Just as an index, as you're aware, we were the first university to offer graduate student support to help bring graduate students to Regina for this conference. The applications opened on the 15th, online applications for those graduate scholarships. We'd announced 500 of them. Within a day, by the next morning, the morning of the 16th, we had 260 applications. And Andre told me this morning over the phone that we're over 500 applications now. So we're pretty confident that we're going to have a good attendance. All the major national bodies are saying that they have an adequate or better than adequate number of abstracts and papers coming in. So we're confident this is going to be a great success. Many people on campus, myself included, will be volunteering in this event. We estimate that the local economic activity created by Congress will generate about 120 jobs and about $8 million in local economic activity. It's a reminder to us, too, that the community that surrounds and supports us, it's good sometimes to think of doing things to support the community that helps to support us. So the partnerships we've built with the hotels, the local organizations, the transit system, city council, is, I think, going to make for a very, very great Congress. The Congress budget is about $1 million, of which $300K will go to support those graduate students. If we have to adjust that graduate student support upward, we will do so, because all of that money for graduate students flows right back into the university system, since it needs to be spent on accommodation on campus and on food on campus. So it's a boon to the graduate students, but the money does not leave the campus system. And of course, a lot of money is being invested in campus upgrades, not just for Congress, but then as a legacy. As soon as Congress is over, all of those upgraded classrooms, the new AV equipment, the smart classrooms and so on, will be available for use in teaching and research for years to come. So we thank everybody in the room who's going to be part of that, or who to date has been part of the planning for Congress. We're excited to have, for the first time ever at the University of Regina, Canada's largest gathering of academics from the humanities and social sciences. So alphabetically, from the anthropologists at the head of the alphabet to, do we have any Zs in the humanities? W, women and gender studies, and everybody in between, 68 professional organizations in between. It's going to be great. You will never again see that many anthropologists or economists or French professors in one place in Regina again. And we're excited by it. So, just to conclude, the next forum will take place as soon after the provincial budget comes down. If that's on the 28th of March, we'll get a forum together as quickly as possible after that. If it's delayed, again, the forum will come as soon as possible after that. And on the 11th of May, the board meets in early May to approve the budgets, and we'll get a forum together as soon as possible after that to walk you through what we've done. Thank you very much for coming. We've got some time for questions. Our understanding is this room is needed by 11:20, so we've got a class in here at 11:30, but we've certainly got time for questions. If you could come to the microphone, and when you do come to the microphone, please state your name, and if you like, your affiliation within campus, so that those who are watching this in Saskatoon or those who will be watching the video later will know who you are. And we're open now to answer your questions. Yep.
Okay. I'm John Klein. I'm in Information Services. About 2 years ago, the university announced that it was implementing its sustainability plan, and one of the short-term goals was to hire somebody to coordinate that. I'm interested to know what progress is being made on that, as it's 2 years on now. I see in the presentation that there's looking to be 35 new people on campus. And also there was mention of the expense of the carbon tax coming in, and somebody whose job is to find efficiencies and sustainability would help us avoid maybe that $300,000 expense for their $100,000 salary and benefits. And then we could build on that as the years go on.
Thanks for your question, John. You and I have had a fair amount of correspondence about this via email. Our plan was to staff the Indigenous thread of the strategic plan first, and that's been done. We have the Office of Indigenization with a very small staff there, and we'd hoped then to be able to move on staffing of a sustainability coordinator. What we didn't expect last year was a $7 million cut. So that's still very much in the mix of discussions. Are we going to be able to do anything about it? We don't know. We'll have to see what the government grant is in March. Your points about energy efficiency are well taken. I think you've been able to see some of the steps that Nelson and his colleagues have already taken to contributing toward greater energy efficiency. But staffing any one of those 35 new positions is going to be a challenge unless the grant is in the positive direction. Other questions?
Maybe while we're thinking of other questions, I'll just expand a little bit as well. I think, and I think part of the theme of your question would be a cultural shift and things. And I think that's key, actually taking and integrating how people think about sustainability into core operations. And I know that Nelson has spoken to that specifically in his department and things that, and I'd say that we've put millions into that thought, and in fact invested millions into energy savings to take and draw it down. We'll do a special bit on that at the next forum, as I mentioned, in terms of some of the savings, but hopefully those two slides, or the slide with the two images of energy in the lab building alone are an indicator of how important this is to us. Thanks.
Dennis Fitzpatrick. I'm from all over the place. Basically, I'm from the Faculty Association and a faculty member. I've got a bunch of questions, but the first one is just, I don't understand how a bond works. And you made a big deal that we have this bond. How is a bond different from a mortgage, and what's the overall cost? And it's just a naive question because I don't know.
Hey, good question. Thanks for giving me the opportunity, because there is a pretty big difference. And I'd say the simplest one is that a mortgage, you pay the principal and interest as it goes on. So if it were, in our case, $79 million, you'd be paying some of the principal back right away, and as well as the interest, whatever the interest rate is. The difference with the bond is you only pay interest, they call it coupon. You pay it twice a year to the coupon holder. In our case, it's 3 of the biggest insurance companies in Canada. And you pay the principal back all as a lump sum at the very end. So we have to come up with $79 million in 40 years from now. And so during that time, we get to take and benefit from the huge benefits of compound interest and things. And if you can envisage, if you look back to the history of the university, we've always averaged about 6% on all of our investments and things like that, the endowment fund, the pension funds and things like that. So pretty good and pretty safe bet that you can project a 6% or at least a 5% return on investment over that time, but we're only paying it at 3%. We're basically getting it to use it at 3.3%. And so that payment back of the $80 million is going to be pretty easy. One quick calculation is that if we just did $1 million a year for the first 10 years and let it sit in the bank, we'd more than, like that would be an ultra conservative way of making sure we've got $79 million at the end. So in short, it's an extremely cheap way to take and manage with extremely low risk investments, and in our case, probably hitting almost an all-time low peak in markets. As we know, since then, the standard interest rates and things like that have gone up. So it's just a good way to consolidate our debt with huge savings that goes to the bottom line of both ancillaries and will end up helping us ultimately on the operating budget.
So that's essentially the plan to pay off the residences.
Hey, absolutely. Almost all of this debt is residence. Depending on how successful we are with fundraising and things, a piece of it is matching for the SIF projects, both the lab building SIF and the College Avenue campus SIF, but the bulk of it is the 2 residence projects, so College West and Kissick.
Okay, the second question is, we're 2/3 or 75% through the year. What is the operating budget surplus, the operating fund surplus going to be this year? Mid-year reports and things like that, people are generally pretty conservative and things. Many units say we're going to spend it, but it does project that we'd be fairly similar, I think, to next year. I'd say down a little bit and things, but we're hopeful, again, that there's a little bit in central and in a little bit in each of the units. Last year, the total amount in the faculties and things ended up being 13.1 million or something like that. And hopefully with good management, we'll be able to do that as well. Because that then gets invested in really important one-time initiatives that are at the choice of those faculties. Well, you know, I'm always interested, and I've pursued this on numerous occasions. I mean, last year seemed like an extraordinary year because you had the clawback, which you took back out of the faculties,
And at the end of the year, you had an I can't remember, $8.8 million surplus. And it seemed to me that you were moving monies from what the operation fund is said to fund largely to capital initiatives last year. And, it was, 6.5 into capital last year. And it seems that when we are getting squeezed on funds for people, that we continue to support buildings.
Can I just maybe kick in there, Dennis? Again, we've got the difference between ongoing, as you know, operating. If you've got a permanent faculty or staff member, you need to make sure you've got money year after year after year for that individual. Whereas much of this that you're talking about is one time. And a couple of examples we've used before. Kin had been saving up very carefully over the years, Harold, probably over 4 or 5 or 6 years, to build up about $800,000 for the artificial turf replacement that took place last year. Education had been saving to do some necessary renovations. But again, we go through these now annually in detail with the Council Committee on Budget, the Council Committee that was established to look at these things. And I believe there's a report at Executive of Council today from the Council Committee on Budget on its view of those projects. So we have to be so careful to keep that distinction between the ongoing commitment we have for permanent faculty and staff, one-time surpluses that can be used for things like turf or renovations. And I know Dave will have more to add to that.
Sure, we can probably come up with lots of different examples. Since we just talked about the dividend that we're projecting for next year on utilities and things, well, that same dividend is coming to us this year. We didn't know that it would be so successful when they did these different initiatives and things like that. We didn't increase the utilities budget by much last year, even though rates went up by 10%. But we're reaping that benefit. That will fall to the bottom line. That will be invested in good one-time initiative. Well, Congress is one of them. Just pulling out examples of things that we've already talked about. A good investment for the campus. They're not all capital, but many of them one time ends up being with capital. But they're not necessarily. Congress is a good example where 2 years in a row we put $500,000 in. My prediction is that we're probably going to need to top that up a little bit more as well.
Yeah, but my problem in looking back, and when you look back at last year, it was $6.5 million into capital. Tunnel project, which was listed as $2 million 2 years in a row, and I don't know what that really means. College Avenue, College West roof, a whole bunch of things. And I find it difficult to talk about one-time monies when you go back to 2010-11 in the audited financial statements, and you see that one-time monies accounts for about $8 million. I mean, over that period of time, when I go back and I look through the audited finances, I see about $65 million moving from the operation budget, the operating fund, into capital projects. And when you have a continuous one-time amount of money based upon your practices, I find it difficult to sustain that type of argument that this is one-time money. It appears to be a planned budget gap which moves money into what is probably your deficient fund, which is capital, from your fund which you can squeeze, which is the fund that pays people's salaries. And so one of the issues for myself and many people on faculty is that we are squeezing people to build things. And that's what the numbers suggest. And that's what I'm relying on.
Yeah, I'd give you the perspective that the entire operating budget is fully committed to very specific actionable items, either hiring faculty members, hiring staff to do different things, be it student services or teach or research or whatever. And it's 100% committed. But there's always some falling, like good management would then, you can't overcommit. Good management also suggests that there are some one-time initiatives that every faculty in every department takes and benefits from. Like occasionally, eventually your furniture is going to wear out. Occasionally, the roof is going to wear out. We use the good example. We don't have the capital money that's coming in. That's why we invest in donor relations, try and find some money from donors, find money from other sources, go into government granting programs to try and find some extra money. But at the end of the day, the one-time surplus then takes and benefits, and we use it in every department for exactly that purpose. Tom mentioned a couple of good examples. It couldn't be invested into staff. Like, I'm not sure what methodology you'd suggest to use to do it that way, but it's base money versus what falls. I know President Timmins has gone around, she's used that example at least in one faculty council meeting that I've heard of, much like your own personal budget in terms of going, budgeting throughout the year, but you might in one year get a nice tax rebate. And so income tax check, rebate check comes at the end of the year and you've got a couple $1,000. Well, you take an investment, maybe a kitchen renovation, maybe a new refrigerator and something like that, but you can't base budget that to pay your mortgage and pay for your food and things, because it might not be there next year. But it sure is handy to take and run and do important things in your unit or in your household and things, and so it's a very practical and realistic way of just managing a one-time windfall.
But the issue, and I think historic budget analysis would say this is a continual fall in, and something which is, I think it's very good management as a matter of fact. If you don't have enough money to manage your physical plant and you've got a stream which you can take money off, and there's nothing illegal about it, it's just I object to the purpose of it. I made this point before, we've done this dance, and I think as the budgets get tighter, it becomes really important to look as whether you're going to support buildings or whether you're going to support people. And there obviously is money within the system to do that. And we will have to agree to disagree. But you know what? I got the audited financials on my side. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. We would, I think, agree to continue to disagree on some things, but just on the residences, we all need to bear in mind that as that close to 15% of visa students may go up a little bit more in coming years, one of our jobs is to ensure that we have accommodation for students who do not live in the Regina area, and that once that we've got them into that accommodation, we realize that our retention rate for those students, that is keeping them from year one into year two, goes up by something like 15 or 18%. So having those residences, though it is an expense, helps us guarantee enrollments that we would otherwise not have had. And as you've heard earlier, those enrollments and the tuition and fee revenue they generate have become increasingly essential to feeding the operating revenues that pay our salaries and benefits. So the residences are a key part of our overall fiscal plan.
Tom, you were talking about the Congress earlier, and I should know this, but do we get some of the registration fees money from people registering for Congress? Is Congress going to
generate revenue for us?
Well, I know for the city it's wonderful. We have all the legacy projects that are staying, but do we actually get some money from them?
Yes, we do. We will be getting money on things like accommodations. That's not all the graduate students taking up all of the accommodations. We hope to sell out all of our available rooms in the residences, including the newly opened College West. So we'll have a revenue stream from accommodations, for food services, for AV rentals, for what else? We've got a couple of other revenue streams. We're not going to make money overall on Congress, but we will have a fairly substantial portion of our outlay covered by various revenue streams, a few of which I've just named. Do we get some of the registration fees? Actually, I'm not sure the answer to that question.
Yeah, no, we don't.
We don't. There we go.
We don't. Okay. And you brought up the point about rooms. Mm-hmm. When we were taking the tour of all the new rooms, by the way, they're gorgeous. somebody was telling me there's not going to be enough rooms in Regina for all those people. Is that your sense
No,
still?
we think we will be okay. We hope that some people will take advantage of a suggestion. People coming in from places like Calgary and Winnipeg will take advantage of our suggestion to come with their families and camp. And so local campgrounds, Moose Jaw, some people are likely going to be doing that. But that's not unknown for congresses in smaller centers like Regina. Well, we've also got the Memorial Cup just in front of Congress, and we've got Mosaic, I think, overlapping with the end of it. So there's lots going on in the city, but we think we'll be okay. If you have a spare bedroom that you're willing to rent.
I do.
Just for the audience who's listening, our fine faculty member from anthropology, and also our rep on the University Board of Governors and things. Just for the audience, it's
Jermaine.
Listen to this 5 years from now. And Jermaine's going to introduce himself.
Yes, Jermaine McKenzie, President of the Students' Union. Overall, I think the presentation was pretty adequate.
C minus.
But underneath all the numbers, I see some issues that are of pressing concern to me as a student, but also as someone who has grown a special affinity for this university. You mentioned that enrollments are up, especially within the international student community, which based on those numbers are good. But my concern is in a point that you made earlier in terms of the vulnerability of this segment of the university population that we have grown so heavily dependent on. You made mention of the fact that should we see a 200 or more reduction in students,
Even 100. Even
100,
yeah.
then we could find ourselves in a very precarious situation. I want to argue that the vulnerability in this segment of the population is probably even more significant than we're willing to accept. And what leads me to say this is that when we look at the services that are offered by the student union to help students who are going through vulnerable financial times, whether it's our emergency bursary, whether it's our pantry program, overwhelmingly, the students who are accessing these services are international students, right? So I am really concerned as to whether, we are seriously looking at the fact that this is an extremely vulnerable group of students that we are pinning the viability of this institution on. I understand that the nature of university funding is changing, and you've alluded to the fact that we've not really gotten an adequate amount of funding from the government, and so we are not able to rely on that as we did probably 20 years ago when it accounted for roughly 80% of the university's operating budget. What kind of contingencies does the university have in plan? The university has to change based on everything that you're presenting here, because if we're just depending on this very vulnerable sector, it doesn't seem to be very prudent. So apart from a little savings here or changing some things to bonds or whatever, it seems as if there has to be a much more concrete plan in place as to how this university will remain sustainable. So,
Thanks, Jermaine. Thanks very much. I mean, you've put your finger on the central problem that every university is facing. As we become more dependent on tuition and fee revenue and we get less on the grant, everything begins to shift. The whole business model has begun to shift because enrollments are vulnerable in a way that the grant never used to be vulnerable and now is. What are we doing to try to mitigate some of that? by putting more supports in place for students, both domestic and international, through units like URI, Student Affairs, Student Counseling, and so on, to assist international and domestic students who are experiencing some difficulties. We are seeking, again, through the leadership of URI, to diversify the source countries for those students. I think it will come as a surprise to many in the room that our most recent numbers from India show that India is now coming up very close to China as our major source country for students. That's a huge shift over the last 3 years. We used to be very dependent on China, Nigeria, and the Saudi program. That's all shifting, so we're trying to diversify where students are coming from so that in the event of a geopolitical disruption of some kind, we have other source countries from which we can draw. What that doesn't mitigate is the tuition burden that these students face. Some of them are well able to afford it. Others are certainly not well able to afford it. And we have begun now to get very close to the top of our Western Canadian group of competitors in tuition. So one of our major discussions in budget this year is, do we really have much room at all to move on tuition, especially as the undergrads, the visa undergrad students, are paying 3x. That's about $20,000 a year in tuition for a visa undergraduate student in arts or science taking a full load of courses. I never imagined, as a student here, I couldn't have imagined a time when a 4-year degree at the University of Regina would cost somebody $80,000 in tuition. But that's where we're at now with visa undergraduates. We have to find new sources of solid revenue, hence some of these revenue generation techniques that we're talking about. But that's going to take time to develop, and none of them is as secure as a government grant from governments, and I'm not going to point to any political party, but governments that say post-secondary education is an investment in the future. It is not an expense. It's an investment in future generations that will bear incredible fruits down the line. Until we can get that into the mix of budget deliberations with government, both on the K-12 and the advanced education side, we think we're going to continue to be challenged to balance the budget with tuition and fee revenue. If we are able to pay faculty and staff.
Hey, and I think what else you're pointing out is something that I think everyone in the room is very aware of, is the challenge of where to invest first. What's the highest priority and need? And you've identified a bunch of risks on the revenue side, which result in cuts, or places that we should need to invest to protect against that risk. And it's that interest and that need versus the needs of some of the other speakers of whether it's investing in other parts of the campus. And that's what the real challenge is in budget making. Which ones, which risks do we address? And that's where the feedback is great.
No, I understand the points that you're making. The issue is even further acknowledged. It doesn't seem as if there is really an immediate plan as to how we're going to address this. I think the answer that I'm getting is that this thing will take time, but as you said, we could have a decline of 200 international students maybe over next year or the following year. So these risks are, in my estimation, quite immediate. And also, yes, a budget is about philosophy. And so I'm just wondering, as a university, how are we hitting back at the government where these cuts to the university are concerned? I think we have, in my estimation, a real moral role to play where, whether it's to be more public about how we feel about the cuts that are coming to education, that you say is an investment in the future of the province and the country, right? So if this is where the main source of revenue has historically been, and this is a shift that is really causing the problem, what type of ways in which the university can better sell itself publicly to the general public, so this is something that remains a priority and the public understands that this is a priority for the growth and benefit of this province?
Again, a great question. One I think we've discussed before. It forms, our feeling is we advocate very strongly with government in monthly meetings, in discussions with the minister, when we appear at Treasury Board, which no third party did this year, by the way, for the first time in a number of years. To me, the most powerful thing the university collectively can do is make sure that our elected representatives hear, not just from the administration, but from individual students, from parents of students, from faculty members, speaking as voters to a government that either wants to get re-elected or to a party that wishes to be elected later, and to say, this is the reason that you should fund post-secondary education better than, say, you're currently funding highways, or justice, or the hospitals, or K-12, because it's a competitive environment for public funding. We're competing with K-12, we're competing with highways, we're competing with justice, health, and all of the ministries for a fairly static pool of public resources at a time when revenues are very strained. How do we make the most effective argument collectively as faculty, staff, students, parents, and alumni for the value of post-secondary in that competitive environment?
And that is key as well. One of the things that it makes it even more difficult, and we think that we're out there and we think we've got the message, you'll hear President Timmons say it lots, that we gave last year, or the sector gave last year, and I think that that message is resonating well with the political and the staff members in government. But one of the challenges that they throw back at us all the time, and it's data, it's hard to refute, is that provincially, Saskatchewan provides more to post-secondary education than most of the other provinces does. Now within that, we get a smaller share by far than U of S, but the data shows that we get almost exactly what the Canadian average is. And so to take and expect to squeeze more out of that rock is awfully tough as well. We're doing it, we're working as hard as we can. We've got people that's their full-time job, is to be working government to try and maximize what we can get as a grant from them. But we have to be realistic as well as what's the likelihood of success when there's all those other competing demands, and we need more than just staff people at the university doing that. We need the public doing that. We need to get the public on side. And that's why part of the messaging, every time a negative message comes out about the university, we lose another community credibility point in things. So an awful lot of the debate that we maybe even have amongst ourselves, in so much as it takes and destroys our community reputation and things, it's not helping in that regard. So there's another place where we can benefit and help one another.
Yeah, and just to build from that point, because I think that's a very, very important point, and I think it also ties back into something else, in terms of the fact that we, as a university, in order to remain financially viable for the last number of years, we've had to ensure that we're seeing an increase in enrollment. I am just, as a student now who's concerned about the overall quality of the education that I'm receiving, I'm just wondering how firm our matriculation standards and whether or not we have had to water down our matriculation standards to ensure that we are having seen increasing enrollments, and is that connected to some of the issues that we are having within the university at large in terms of students struggling in certain faculties?
Quick answer, Jermaine, is each of the 9-line faculties from arts through to social work has the right to determine its incoming standards, what a student is required to have in terms of grade 12 credits and standing. I'm not aware of any faculties watering down matriculation standards. What we do have, though, is an increase, in common with many Canadian universities, an increase in the number of students who do not have the kind of preparation that will set them up for full success in year one. Hence the increased supports via URI and via student affairs for students who need some help with basics on the way in. And those can be domestic Canadian students coming from suburban high schools as much as they are international students coming from Nairobi or Beijing.
All right, that's it, thanks.
Thanks.
And Jermaine, if I can just respond to the grad level, our English as a second language standards are either equal or higher than almost every other university in the country. So we're turning away students if they're just shy of the IELTS or one of the other measures. In fact, I just did that with a student, I won't mention the country, but she was very interested in coming to work with me, and I couldn't because she was just shy of what the IELTS score is. So we're not letting in less than standard graduate students, that's for certain.
Thank you.
M.
Hi. Sorry, I'm a little cold. My name is Emmanuel Aito, and I'm the director of ICT. As a budget manager myself, I'm not sure if I should be the one asking the question. Excuse me. The preference given to growth areas on campus as a strategy is pretty much unassailable. But I'm wondering if there is a place also as a strategy to pay a little more attention to smaller units that have demonstrated that have the ability and potential for growth as we consider the risks in terms of student enrollments. Doesn't it make sense to make a strategic investment in smaller units that have done the work, that are asking to be allowed to prove their mettle?
Yes, but here's the play, or the trade-off. When you're doing budgeting, if you've got a unit, and you're referring to yours, let's be plain, that is very small in terms of student counts, that has a tremendous amount of dollar support per student, and you say, this unit's doing great things, it's got great plans for growth, what can we invest here? While over on the other side of campus, we have third and fourth year sections with 50, 60, and 70 students, and faculty colleagues burning out under workload that cannot be sustained because of the demand in their unit. Where do we put scarce resources in that sort of situation? And there's no pat answer to that, Em. There are good arguments for encouraging growth in units that are very well resourced per student. And our Gulf on campus right now runs from about X to 4X. So in engineering right now, the support per student is about 1/4 the amount of support per student that some of the very expensive areas of campus get. At some point, we are actively disadvantaging students in the poorly resourced areas in order to fund more in the well-resourced areas, even though there are good reasons for doing so. And that's all part of the budget discussions that we'll be going through starting Friday.
Yes, but cross-subsidization has always been part of budgeting.
It has?
And if there's no movement, and we and I know that's been the position. I know it's not your intention, but is the prescription for these small units asphyxiation? Is that what we're proposing? That they just okay?
Absolutely not.
All right.
We just have to find a way to try to meet the needs of people in very high demand areas and people in comparatively lower demand areas as well.
Hey, and I'd say that there's a number of different places where we have entertained and we'd encourage, I think actually that's part of the budget request letter, is if there's a business case to be made and things like that, to take and invest and things, then that's part of, like if it's a way to increase revenues and things because there's a proven or anticipated enrollment capability, then those are the kind of things we want to hear about and things. But again, it's contrasted with, often there's lots of good ideas. I think as the president always said, there's no lack of good ideas, except we can't invest in all of them.
Thanks, Sam. I think, Jamie, you'll be the last one if you're going to the mic, because we're just about out of time. So we've got to clear the room for the class at 11:30. If there are any quick questions, if not, thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you late March, early April.
Thank you.